Good evening, everyone. I am Abhiruchi Lakas. I am associate member at the Legal Law Forum. We at the Legal Law Forum endeavor to promote legal education and awareness through various legal educational activities. We believe in encouraging young law students and helping them resolve the gap between those who come from a legal background and those who do not. Today we have with us an outstanding advocate, Anshuman Oza sir. I'd like to ask Ms. Pooja, our coordinator for today, to introduce him to us.
Thank you, Abhurichi. Today we have an amazing opportunity to have with us Advocate Ansuman Ojasam, retired commander and co-founder, Indian Ex-Defence Service Employees Chamber and of Commerce and Industry, and life member of Navy Foundation. Sir, as our guest for today's webinar. Sir has been commissioned in Indian Navy on 1st January 1993 as a permanent commissioned officer in executive branch. He has dedicated and resourceful in security and safety administration, legal management, HR management and crisis management professional, offering diverse experience of over 21 years in area of security, safety, legal and HR management in different capacities. He has served in various Indian Navy warships for 9 years and participated in various operations. His naval service also includes nearly 12 years continuous service as a naval office specialist in various sensitive defense organizations. Presently, other than being and practicing advocate since 2014, Sir is a co-founder, spokesperson, and legal consultant of IES-ECCI, a registered society of veteran welfare. Sir is also an excellent disaster management specialist, having first-hand experience of tsunami relief operation in Andaman and Nicobar Island. Today, Sir will enlighten us here on the topic of military justice system and need and scope of lawyers in India. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for this opportunity in front of this August gathering. And I really commend you all for doing this excellent job as a legal professional also, because digital legal aid, I think, is the future, especially with the present pandemic scenario. As stated, I was fortunate enough to serve in Indian Navy for about 23 years. Took premature retirement in 2014 May. Since then, I have been practicing law. I did complete my law from Mumbai University in 2011, and during my tenure, still left in the Navy. From 2008 to 2012, I have also handled legal officer's job as part of Record Office of the Navy, which deals with nearly all the serving and retired sailors' legal issues of the country, which really helped me a lot in my present foray as a appellate lawyer in the High Courts, Armed Forces Tribunal, and Supreme Court. Having said that, coming down to the crux of the topic, when we say military law, what does it mean actually? Uh, as you know, through civilization, laws across the world has been coming from the kings, the kingdoms. So it is actually the military of each and every kingdom through the ages, and later the kingdoms having formed different kind of legal systems. Military law has the genesis from the earliest human civilizations foray into the way the civil society should function. Most of our law, as we are all aware, in India, our predecessors have been the Britishers. So the British legal system that will function, which was heavily and still heavily as militarily, we follow the same systems and practices of discipline, the punishment system, the jail system. Normally, to put it for a layman term, there are very few acts commonly discussed in the common domain of law. We know about the Army Act, the Navy Act, and the Air Force Act. But there are much more to that. They have regulations. The paramilitaries also come under similar laws. The Indian Coast Guard comes under similar laws. The Admiralty law, which is more of a sea bounded thing, has got a lot of nuances from the maritime perspective, which is very similar to what Navy does in its day-to-day duties. Since independence, the legal system of the armed forces has been very closed loop system, as in In the military, we have our own court martials, the summary trial system, the appeal system to the service chiefs and to the central government. Since as a military personnel, none of us are allowed to have association or to communicate with press, to have any outside affiliations of any kind. So the justice system of Army, Navy and Air Force Act has been created under the statutory powers of the President of India, the Supreme Commander in Chief, who has further delegated these powers to the Army, Navy and Air Force chiefs. And doctrine of pleasure is one of the earliest form where it has now been imbibed into the constitution, where this it is the Supreme Commander in Chief from which the entire judicial system of the military flows. As I brought out that in all the three services we have to dispense the justice system, we have the legal branch, which is popularly known as the JAG branch, Judge Advocate General. Now, the JAG branch of Army, Navy, Air Force primarily are practicing advocates from the civil domain who opt to join armed forces. The upper age limit is 27. So this is one certain segment that would be of interest to the budding lawyers of today to join the armed forces in the legal branches. The paradigm shift of military law has been with the formation of the Armed Forces Tribunal. Armed Forces Tribunal Act 2007, it came into being. That has actually made the foray of the appeal system of the military law into the public legal discourse much more openly. Armed Forces Tribunal, there are 17 of them in all across the country. Now, most of the judicial system that has evolved in the country, the armed forces people, I myself being a practicing lawyer, but also a veteran, we are really indebted to the highest judiciary of the country, the apex court and the honorable high courts, who over years have interpreted the various rules, regulations and statutory acts of the Army and Navy and Air Force to see to it that the soldiers also get, both serving and veterans, get similar kind of legal rights that a citizen of the country enjoys. In that direction, one of the benchmark judgment has been the Pritpal Singh versus Union of India judgment in 82, where the Honorable Apex Court uh, advised the government that for every military person, though they have an inner mechanism of discipline and trials, there should be at least an appeal system before any finality happens to them. Because earlier, the only modus operandi for legal options for a serving and retired soldier was to go to the honorable high courts, who are, as it is, clogged with lot more responsibility, and thereafter the Supreme Court. Armed Forces Tribunal has come and filled up that space. Based on the judgment of the Honorable Apex Court in Pritpal Singh versus Union of India, a committee was formed, a bill was passed, and AFT Act 2007, along with the AFT regulations, practice rules, and procedure rules 2008-2009, both came into being. Now, why this is a watershed moment? Normally, the military law per se, as it stood before AFT came into being, was more of discipline and punishment oriented. There was no understanding of service conditions and its reliefs that is required by a soldier like any other jobs would entail. There's no clear-cut mechanism other than the existing service redressal mechanism. With Armed Forces Tribunal Act, which is actually an intrinsic part of the Air Force, Navy and Army Act, so much so that it says very clearly that words not explained in the AFT Act would have the same meaning as they are in that form in Army, Air Force and Navy Act, which makes an integral part. Now, there are two components of the AFT Act which one needs to understand when it goes for jurisprudence or writ petition equivalent, if we want to see. There is one section 14 which covers all other segments, and there is one section 15 which mainly covers the criminal appeal system. Under this, there are limitations, there are procedures by which a person has to first go through its service channel before they come to appeal. But notwithstanding, it's an evolving system of law as it stands today. At any stage, a person serving in the service or retired or their family members can come to the AFT courts at various benches and seek an appeal and admit the matter and heard the matter will be heard in totality. Now, how does it help the civil lawyers, called parlance, if I say from a military perspective? Because the armed forces is a widespread population. In fact, if you ask me, armed forces is perhaps the second largest employer of this country after the railways. And if you count our families and various streams of armed forces, that is Army, Navy, Air Force, Defense Security Corps, Territorial Army, Indian Coast Guard, we are talking about a population of about 5 to 6 crores spread across the country who need access to the legal forum. Hence, lawyers all across the country can be effective in reaching out to these clients for the respective 17 benches spread across the country and the principal bench, that being in Delhi, to provide the recur to the criminal justice system for these populations. Now, why would you say normally a lawyer is required for a service personnel? You'll appreciate the fact the soldier, whether it's an officer or a non-officer, is mainly trained in the profession of arms. As in our basic profile, basic training, basic mindset is for the organizational purpose to fight a war, prevent a war, peacetime operation, wartime operations. So though we have various rules, regulations, acts which guide these systems mainly through the offices of the various judge advocate generals at different stages of Army, Navy and Air Force, a basic fighting troop, whether it's an officer and soldier, obviously is not very well conversant of the rights that is available to him or her under the law. That is a big gap that is existing, where lawyers who understand these laws better, now that Armed Forces Tribunal has spread across the country, will be able to find a bigger audience with this serving and retired people. Over a period of time, various Supreme Court judgments, especially over disability pension, recently you must have covered the judgment of Short Service Commission officers, men and women, Honorable Apex Court's judgment in REM, have widely put very progressive discourse into what military and military law should be. Like how is it relevant, and in a nutshell, obviously like any law of the country, and even the Army, Air Force and Navy Act has to abide by the Article 14, 16, 19 and 21 of the Constitution to be relevant as a service provider. In fact, in a recent judgment, the Apex Court has also made it relevant that for summary trials, now summary trial are not typical court-martial. To just tell you about basic about court-martial, maybe some of you are aware about, court-martial is a jury system of trial, where there is a judge advocate general who is a trial judge advocate, and then there is a panel of 5 officers. One of them is the senior most, who is the president of the court-martial. So the entire legal process, the legal procedure being followed, the legal safeties being followed is the responsibility of the trial judge advocate as for a judge in a jury system. But the final decision, the outcome of the trial is finally decided by the court-martial members of 5. And the decision of a court-martial, since it's a presidential sanctioned court-martial, cannot be challenged in any court of law. What can be challenged is the procedural lapses. So though the finality of a court-martial judgment is protected because it's a constitutional court under the powers of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief, but the procedural violations can set the entire punishment aside. There again is a plethora of court-martials being conducted across the country, where many civil lawyers can find their foothold and get into this justice system and provide justice to the people who really give so much for the nation. Also, in this entire segment, if you see the military justice system, the punishment is more or less guaranteed. Unlike a civil system, having been there in the services, I can vouch for that. Our conviction rates are, it's rarely you don't get convicted. So it is that kind of system. So having said that, the Jawan or the officer, whenever he's accused of a particular legal disciplinary process, normal practice today is normally officer of a choice of the particular person is appointed from the services, but definitely they lack the legal knowledge that advocate practicing in the civil courts and other courts will have. So that becomes a big drawback. Also, non-availability of lawyers across the country in different spaces, or maybe not enough lawyer volunteering to come into this domain, becomes a restriction or limitation for the service personnel as well as ex-servicemen. Because as on the interpretation of Supreme Court today, even for a summary trial, a Jawan, normally summary trials are for Jawans, is entitled to hire a legal counsel of his or her own choice. Hence, that opens up a huge thing, because the criminal trial process of military is huge. It is an ongoing process, and with the growth of the Armed Forces Tribunal led appeal system, the legal awareness is much more in the service, both with serving and retired. But much is left to be desired, because this is a very new trend. So while the new generation of the better educated military people who join the armed forces are little bit aware, many more who are still eligible for many reliefs like pensionary benefits, ECHS benefits, they live far and wide across away from the cities and the small towns. They still need to get access to this. In fact, I would like to quote, in fact, in most of these cases, it is better I quote judgments which helps, since you all are professionals, how big this entire challenge is. We have a judgment of special larger bench of Honorable Principal Bench of Delhi, where they have quoted this entire thing. So it is a legal requirement now. So in it is called Sergeant Girish versus Union of India, in which this particular paragraphs, if there is no restriction of time, I would like to read it, because this is the crux of the military law as it evolves and interpreted. Because all the AFT tribunals, there are two members. One is a judicial member, who are all retired High Court judges, and one is an administrative member, who are generally Lieutenant General and equivalent rank military officer. So while the administrative member guides the bench on the nuances of the military law, it is the application of legal mind of a senior retired High Court judge which actually drives the entire legal dimensions of the ever evolving military law process of this country. So, in the said judgment is it is OA, original application 1439 of 2016, ex Sergeant Girish Kumar versus Union of India. Para 56 it says, we would like to add that the respondents have their internal mechanisms, respondent as in the military, Ministry of Defense, in the form of first appeal and second appeal to redress the grievances of disability pension. It has been observed by us that the applications are being dismissed in a routine manner by the first and second appellate authorities, thus increasing the number of litigations in this tribunal. When the issues have been well settled by the apex court in various judgments, and now the larger bench of the tribunal has settled the issue of payment of arrears and broadbanding, we hope and trust that the respondents will use this judgment to dispose most of the cases pertaining to disability pension and payment of arrears in first and second appeals to the respondent. Now the question is, when a first and second appeal is also written by a particular soldier serving or retired, they need again a legal input, how to frame the appeal. Though there are well settled judgments like this judgment and various other Supreme Court judgments like Dharamveer Singh versus Union of India, Rajpal versus Union of India, the lack of application of legal content in appeal many times results in them not getting the legal recourse that they are entitled to. The court in the same paragraph judgment contains expansion of legal aid services to ex-servicemen and their families. Para 59. In the 14th report of the Law Commission under the chairmanship of First Attorney General of India, Sri M.C. Setalvad, it was observed, insofar as a person is unable to obtain access to a court of law for having his wrongs redressed, justice becomes unequal and laws which are meant for his protection fail in their purpose. Para 60. The preamble of our constitution, along with Article 39A, endeavors to ensure justice in its complete sense for all. In order to prevent the above scenario, by providing free legal aid to the poor and weaker sections of the society and to promote justice on the basis of equal opportunity. The main motive behind the concept of legal aid is that poor and illiterate should be able to approach the courts and their ignorance and poverty should not be an obstacle in the way of their obtaining justice from the courts. Para 61. That prior to 1995, there is no formal scheme of administering legal aid in India, although tacitly existing through Section 304 of the Code of Criminal Procedure and Order Roman 23, Rule 17 of the Code of Civil Procedure. The higher judiciary, upholding its obligation to the constitutional principles of equal protections in law for all, sensitized the process of judicial redressal by sufficient judicial intervention, judicial activism, and public interest litigation. It is for the first time in the year 1987 a formal mechanism was established for implementing, administering, and regulating legal aid in India through Legal Services Authorities Act, which came into being in the year 1995. This act lays down the criteria / entitlement for grant of benefit of legal aid and even provides an inclusive list of 8 categories of people for the same, including even an industrial worker, Section 12F, and also a person with disability, defined under the Person with Disabilities, Equal Opportunities Protection of Rights and Full Participation Act. It is noteworthy that the Act currently does not specifically include within its scope and ambit such as ex-servicemen and their families. This nationwide framework for legal aid under Act 1987 also provides for establishment of a National Legal Services Authority and a State Legal Services Authority for each state. District Legal Services Authorities and Taluk level Legal Services Authorities are also constituted for each district to implement the legal aid programs and corresponding schemes in relation thereto, give effect to the all legal service authorities. In effect, we are all actual and incidental expenses pertaining to an eligible person under the Act in relation to a case starting from paying of court fees to the entire fee of legal counsel. The Lok Adalats established under the same statute were originally functioning for dispensing justice through amicable settlement and compromise terms. However, over a period of time and with the introduction of formal amendments to the statute, permanent Lok Adalats are also incorporated which possess the powers of formal adjudication of disputes, even in case of failure of compromise or settlement. However, as already mentioned above, the said Act does not specifically include ex-servicemen and their families within its scope and ambit for grant of legal aid benefit, and there are umpteen number of ex-servicemen and their dependents who are unable to get their wrongs redressed and continue to suffer in either ignorance of judicial mechanism or inability to access the same on account of financial hurdles and other disabilities. The Armed Forces Tribunal, created specifically to cater the needs for them, also remains inaccessible to many due to a variety of reasons, including lack of knowledge. While there are presently 17 total benches of the Armed Forces Tribunal at 9 cities, although not all are functional, catering to the armed forces, there is still lack of accessibility in both financial and geographical terms. It is therefore imperative to initiate a mechanism for improved accessibility to judicial redressal for ex-servicemen, particularly disabled soldiers, and their families through legal aid under Legal Services Authorities Act 1987. The same being also in consonance with Article 39E of the Constitution, which is the foundation for the provisions of legal aid. So an effective mechanism for the benefit of the disadvantaged and disabled ex-servicemen and their families can be thought of a formal method to bring ex-servicemen and their dependents members within the ambit of Section 12 of the Act by way of an amendment is crucial. So by this particular order, they have already given the sanction and directed the government that in the legal aid program that we all lawyers know are accessible to the citizens of the country, the ex-servicemen also should be made part of it. They have also suggested that the same should be done by projecting to the judicial officers a regular and comprehensive data analysis regarding the hindrances faced by the ex-servicemen and their families in accessing justice and courts by seeking assistance from accredited NGOs and other organizations who work for betterment of ex-servicemen. You may be aware, but still for the repetition's sake, every district has a Jala Sainik board. There is a Kendriya Sainik board. Every state government has a Minister of Ex-Servicemen Welfare. The Honorable Governor of each and every state is the parent constitutional head for all ex-servicemen welfare with the Armed Forces Flag Day Fund. So there is a huge impetus within the government machinery to reach out for any welfare and of course legal right being a constitutional right for every citizen including ex-servicemen. There is a huge scope, and this particular three judge order is giving you that route additionally to reach out to the ex-servicemen through the ex-servicemen aid as legal aid mechanism. They also talk about you know digital formation, about digital legal services in the said order as to how it can be used to reach out for application for ADR for the same kind of services to the ex-servicemen. Now, it is still a evolving law. So, military law, as we understand, is still in the process of its infancy. As I said earlier, the law evolves more because of judicial pronouncements, but that was much more restricted because of lack of awareness within the service personnel, the restriction of only High Court and Supreme Court being available for various judgments. But now with Armed Forces Tribunal, with a large number of lawyers from all walks of life being part of it, the legal pronouncements and the number of cases being more, this is a fast evolving subject where any young lawyer of this country looking at it can be a full-time advocacy appellate profession, whether from appellate side or from the government counsel side. So that is a big takeaway for the advocate fraternity of this country. And this is a recession proof market. So these are most of the cases. I mean, I do not have exact statistics, but I can fairly say 60 to 70% of the cases in armed forces, in various armed forces tribunals, are relating to pension. So obviously, there is a well settled body of judgments of the apex court. So it is much more easier for any budding lawyer to get into this particular subject, because disability pension is very well defined by Supreme Court by various judgments in favor of the retired military person. Now coming to the mechanism of how is it relevant, I have already told that as you come into the Armed Forces Tribunal jurisdiction and the environment, you will also interact with the Judge Advocate General branch officers of the Army, Navy and Air Force, which will give you, while interacting with them, a first-hand input as to is it your calling to join as a legal officer in the Army, Navy and Air Force. Mind you, Army, Navy and Air Force are not the only branches for Judge Advocate. Similar opportunities are also there in all the paramilitary services today, whether it's ITBP, CRPF, CISF, they all have a legal branch. And in military also, if you come as a short service commission officer in the judge advocate branch, you can shift later to these paramilitary or other government departments, or go back to your practice as a lawyer with a huge amount of experience and exposure of being in a very disciplined force. And military itself is a very good opportunity for Judge Advocate General branch, because you are a vertical specialist in this branch as a advocate, because you deal only and only with matters of law pertaining to military and its implementation and its involvement in the military justice system. And I would rather make it more interactive session, which will help me come out more rather than be a monologue. So I'm ready to take any questions of any kind. I think I'll be able to pitch it more better if questions are asked. They're relevant.
Sure, sir. Thank you so much, sir, to enlighten us on the topic. So we have received few questions on the topic. So with your prime permission, can I go on to the Q&A session, sir?
Please.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So the first question, so what are the special requirement and training required to be a judge in the Armed Force Tribunal?
To becoming a judge of the Armed Forces Tribunal, as I said, judges are appointed by the government for Armed Forces Tribunal, like for any other High Court or any other tribunals. So to become a judge there, either you have to be retired High Court judge or a retired Lieutenant General rank officer as it stands today to become a judicial or admin member of the courts. But if you are talking about being an advocate in practicing advocate in the Armed Forces Tribunal, is it? I think that should have been the content. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
So becoming a practicing lawyer in AFT, it is just like any other court. You can walk in and practice. Yes, if you want to be empaneled as a Union of India counsel, then your respective law ministry empanels the lawyer like the empanel for High Court. They make a pool, and finally Law Ministry of India empanels those lawyers. But generally they are all senior counsels with 15-20 years of practice. But otherwise, as a lawyer, you can walk into any armed forces tribunal and start practicing like any other court of law. There's no special qualification required.
Question is, what are the provisions related to bail provided to arrested military personnel? Are they based on the grant of commanding officer or superior military official? And what can be the reforms that can be brought to these provisions, if there are?
Actually, these are good times. Earlier, it was very big problem. Bail is a specific issue has already been involved within the mandate of armed forces tribunal. So, like any courts, bail can be interim bail, pre-arrest bail, all kinds of bails can be granted by the armed forces tribunal. But otherwise, if you go down to the grassroots level of a police arresting a service personnel and uh, putting him custody, there is a parallel jurisdiction. The law as it stands, whenever a person of military is arrested by civil police, the magistrate is supposed to approach the commanding officer of the arrested personnel, who is in judicial police custody rather, and the commanding officer then has to take permission from his superior authority to take over the case for military. It's only after military in writing communicates to the magistrate that they are not willing to take over the case, the magistrate can proceed with the case. Otherwise, the case has to be held in abeyance till a written communication is given by military. Now, suppose military wants to take over the case, the magistrate accordingly passes an order. The person's custody is taken over by military police along with the documents. And the trial is carried out in the military courts as per the military laws. And subsequently, order copy is communicated to the magistrate to prove the compliance of the directive of the magistrate. But otherwise, in today's time, it is not much of an issue because with the armed forces tribunals with the bail granting power, all military personnel with bail, they approach the nearest armed forces tribunal for the respective bails.
Thank you, sir. So we'll move to the third question. So, what are the major hurdles for a civilian lawyer when he is intended to practice in army-related tribunals or courts?
First of all, there is no hurdles. So, come out of that box. Military laws are not at all as bulky or the only difference between a civil statutory law and military law is the military parent statute is generally very brief, and the connected statutory rules and regulations is what defines the implementation of a particular policy, disciplinary or administrative. So one has to be conversant and updated as to those, because those regulations also keep getting amended or modified over 5 to 10 years period. So that is the only challenging part, to have access to that document, which is not nowadays that difficult as it used to be earlier. Other than that, it is a very simple law, and the whole benchmark is even the AFT Act says very clearly it is on principle of natural justice. Evidence Act is definitely applicable, but Criminal Procedure Code barely gets applicable in the trials here, both in military as well as AFT Act. The whole bottom line here is on the principle of natural justice, and due process is what are the guidelines. So it's quite doable by any practicing advocate.
Thank you, sir. Moving to the fourth question. Sir, do you think that Indian military can be reformed by incorporating civilian values into military life?
Uh, Being on both sides of the fence, I can tell you, military is basically not even a profession. It's a way of life, and through ages in all countries, uh, democratic appeals or democratic setup or too much of decision making at the lower echelon does not achieve the military target. As we very famously quote, that ours is not to ask why, ours is to do and die. So, having said that, the hierarchical system of military is not by default but by design. So, a soldier, a mid level officer is there for fulfillment of a mission or an objective of the military. So, too much of civil ethos coming there definitely impinges in your war preparedness, because in today's day and age, preparation is more important than fighting a war. Gone are the days where you could fight a war for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, like World War and all. Nowadays, a battlefield is virtual. Technology is very lethal. So, a 7 day war today has a Kargil war that you all have seen in television, which was not even officially defined as a war, had more ammunitions than maybe 71 war. So the whole practice of warfare today is very different. It is very technology oriented. It's very stressful. Having said that, the nature of job of military is to do with what the government gives you. So military doesn't decide what weapons they will fire. Military doesn't decide what will be the pay perks and privileges. It is depending on the government policy or the government of the day. So too much of civil interference into the military. I mean, we are a very young democracy. I'm talking about evolved democracies like America, where military has been, civilian interference has been prevalent. Even they are realizing the pitfall of it. You need to understand. I'm not talking about only Indian military. Where does the military comes from? It comes from the British regimentation, which is about 250 years old. It has not been created after independence. There's a regimentation of the Britishers, which was actually a copybook of earlier Mughals and earlier Rajputs and Marathas, which has been imbibed by the Britishers. They didn't create it; they just continued it and polished it certain bit. Has held the country together. Uh, when you talk about democracy, we talk about democracy. We actually don't talk about stark ground reality. India doesn't have a single friendly neighbor. We are basically a conglomerate of 540 odd kingdoms put together as a nation. We are still finding out whether we are a federal or republic, or what should be the center state structure. There, the unquestioning, unwavering loyalty of a military person with the gun, or a air force or a navy person, is the requirement for protecting this integrity of nation and its democracy. So in my personal opinion, we already have checks and balances. What is required is not more civilian interference. What is required is the people holding those chairs. And this, mind you, you have brought a very sensitive topic, and I should quote the Honorable Apex Court on this. It is always safer in today's time and age. This is a judgment where time and again it has been challenged because of certain interpretation of people of the AFT Act, whether it has been, whether should it be, because as per the provision it seems AFT Act can only be challenged in Supreme Court and High Court should not be the go between. So there have been two judgments by Supreme Court. I am reading the latest judgment which annuls that thing and says no, every AFT judgment can be under 226 challenge on High Court. In that perspective, this is the civil appeal number 8588 of 2019 in Honorable Apex Court, Roger Matthew versus South Indian Bank. Certain relevant paragraphs I'll quote in that. This is, I mean, it has, the court has gone not only L.R. Chandra, if you are aware about. L.R. Chandra basically defines that AFT armed tribunals as per se should have to be governed first by High Court, then by Supreme Court. In the last line of the judgment is very it is very relevant today's time, especially as lawyers. Judiciary is the pillar of a democracy. Para 57, the Honorable Justice Deepak Gupta says, at the end, I would like to quote what Dr. B.R. Ambedkar said while addressing Constituent Assembly on 25/11/1949. In his words, quote, because I feel, however good a constitution may be, it is sure to turn out bad, because those who are called to work it happen to be a bad lot. However bad a constitution may be, it may turn out to be good if those who are called to work it happen to be a good lot. The working of the constitution does not depend only upon the nature of the constitution. The constitution can provide only the organs of state such as the legislature, the executive and the judiciary. The factors on which the working of those organs of the state depend are the people and the political parties they will set up as their instruments to carry out their wishes and their politics. Bracket closed. Unquote. One can only hope that keeping these thoughts in mind, a system is developed which ensures selection of people having impeccable integrity, who are totally independent, have a good character and reputation, are free from influence or pressure, and have requisite experience in the jurisdiction they would deal with the chairperson members of tribunal. This particular issue was to define what should be a judicial system for the military despite tribunals, which should give a fair justice to them. So I think the founding father of the constitution, Dr. Ambedkar, has rightly put, The challenge today is not about executive, legislature, and judiciary. The challenge today, are we those capable citizens who, in those seats of responsibility, execute what is constitutionally right? And that is what will define us as democracy.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. So moving to next question. So what is the credibility of international convention and treaties in case of captive of soldier, like we saw in the case of Wing Commander Abhinandan? Over to you, sir.
The Geneva Conventions are very clear. Now, there are two sides to it. I will give a judicial interpretation, I will give a military interpretation to this one. Pakistan has never abided by Geneva Convention. So, if you are asking somebody who is not going to abide by it and hold a stick in your hand, it doesn't make. But yes, I mean it is a great victory for our statesmanship. We succeeded in Wing Commander Yadav, but then we have not yet succeeded with Commander Kulbhushan's case till date. So yes, there is a Geneva Convention, but ultimately the sovereign nations always use their means and methodology, which is not respectable. But having been part of my military for 23 years, which I was very honored to be part of, I can say by and large Indian military abides by it, and there are stories galore. And if you come to our Facebook page of our organization, just few days back, we shared a story of an army officer who, in 71 POW camp, he had a blood group which was matching with a POW soldier, JCO of Pakistani army. He gave blood to him, and in our entire disputes or skirmishes that we have at the borders, our military definitely takes the higher edge of the military dharma of giving a soldier its respect and its due, which is supposed to be in the battle. But for Pakistan, definitely they are a nation which we jokingly say it is an army which has got a nation, not nation which has got army. So there is no clear cut. Why they do what they do is always a debatable issue. But yes, in Kulbhushan Jadhav, at least we would say that for the first time the thing has moved to international court. We have an eminent lawyer like Shri Hari Salve who is representing it, and at least the world is going through the entire reality on ground, how things are working or not in that nation.
Thank you, sir. So moving to next question. So kindly elucidate on how a law student can establish balance between academic progress, physical fitness, and extracurricular activities, particularly required for JAC, and whether the students need to have prior knowledge of army-centric law during the process of or interview of JAC. Yes, sir. Over to you.
The first of all, the age limit, upper age limit of JAG officers has been purposely kept at 27, because even the military feels a person should have had some exposure in the civil courts before opting to come as a, because by 27 I think any lawyers have more than 2 to 3 years of practice as an intern or junior or in the court of law. So obviously the service is looking at somebody who is conversant with law as it stands. So prior knowledge of military law definitely is not a, what you have to do is your selection procedure in military for officers, whether whichever stream you are coming from, is one, that is service selection board, SSB we call it. Now there is the aptitude test, which is internationally accredited test that military has been doing. That is the main hurdle that you have to overcome to qualify to become a JAG officer. The rest of it, whether it is a physical aptitude, yes, you need certain amount of physical aptitude, but then you don't have a military if you don't make you physically fit. So don't worry about your physical fitness. You should be doing your running, yoga and things like that to keep you normally fit. But your focus more should be how to build up the aptitude to qualify the service selection board, because it has got a thematic test. There are a lot of coaching institutes in this country all across where you should go and at least see what is the SSB qualification, because that is a very unique kind of format.
Thank you, sir. So moving to next question. So what is your opinion on judicial activism of Supreme Court with matters relating to defense force? So for an example, the matter of permanent commission of women in defense service, is it justified or the defense sphere, or It's the administration should not be looked upon by the Supreme Court, sir.
If the short service, I'll again repeat what I've said already earlier. The military community as a whole are indebted to the judiciary of this nation, because though our acts and rules and regulations have all been there in place, it is only because of judicial pronouncement they have reached a level of legitimacy where government was more or less coerced, to say very politely, to implement them. Same has happened with the short service commission. I won't tag it women officer, because that is another thing government is trying to portray, to deny the short service commission men officers. So the judgment is pertinent to short service commission officers. Just a brief background without not getting technical, it is because now it's a decided judgment in them. In 1999 November, if I am not mistaken the month, the government of India had come up with a circular that the short service commission officers will be considered for permanent commission along with permanent commission officers in the similar bracket, which is presidential sanction. However, later Navy in particular in 2008 came up with another internal orders from their service headquarters saying that selectively this will be applied. That is where the problem started. The similar orders were published in Army and Air Force too. So the genesis of this judicial process started with Babita Punia versus Union of India case, which was for Army, and Delhi High Court, and thanks to Honorable Delhi High Court, that Babita Punia was decided in the favor of the petitioner, Annie Nagraj. I mean, she had been my co-colleague also in the Navy when I have served, and her case also started from Honorable Delhi High Court. And if you see in letter and spirit, the Honorable Apex Court has upheld the interpretation of Delhi High Court. And yes, there has been a delay, but that is the sanctity of judiciary, that judiciary cannot take on the role of executive. Honorable Apex Court is very much aware about his responsibility, and the government is aware about it. But the question here we need to ask, more relevant, is once an Apex Court has given a judgment in various cases, not only in these cases, who ensures that the implementation of this is taken to task? Other than filing contempt in Apex Court, as of now, there is no other remedy. But there are certain things that the Honorable Apex Court has said in another judgment. Same judgment that I was reading earlier, Honorable Justice Deepak Gupta's, about military impact of this judgment not being given. They have talked about a judicial impact assessment committee. This is a directive to the government in the judgment. I agree with the Chief Justice that, and I'm quoting from the judgment, I agree with the Chief Justice that an attempt should be made to do away with filing of first appeal as a matter of right to Supreme Court. At present, at least 24 statutes provide for appeal directly to Supreme Court. The Supreme Court becomes a court of first appeal, which is highly avoidable. If we follow the law laid down in L. Chandra Kumar Supra, the High Court should have the jurisdiction to entertain writ petitions against the orders of the tribunal. This will reduce the burden of the Supreme Court. In the next para, he says, the judicial impact assessment committee can also, after assessment, recommend that some tribunals should be wound up and the jurisdiction of the tribunals be given back to civil courts or to the high courts or to some other tribunal. It can also suggest the merger of two or more. The next issue is who should carry out the judicial impact assessment. In my view, the Judicial Impact Assessment Committee should comprise of 2 retired judges of the Supreme Court, the senior being chairperson of the committee, and 1 retired Chief Justice of a High Court, all 3 to be nominated by the Chief Justice of India. Out of the 3, at least 2 should have been the chairperson or members of tribunals. When I say tribunal here, we are talking about Armed Forces Tribunal only. 2 members of the executive not below the rank of Secretary to the Government of India. 1 from Ministry of Law and Justice and 1 from some other branch can also be members. But these members should be appointed in consultation with the Chief Justice of India. So the question is, Supreme Court is very much aware the lacuna that is there in the system of implementation of various Supreme Court judgments. But then that is where the judicial role under Constitution of Judiciary ends. Whether we like it or not, I know as a democracy we feel Supreme Court should do everything, but that is not the correct interpretation. Judiciary is abiding by its rules, by the 4 corners of judicial system. there has to be more responsibility from various other parts of the governance, that is the executive and the legislature, to see that the orders of the Honorable Apex Court are implemented in, especially in favors of the soldier. Just imagine a soldier who is fighting, knowing the risks, has voluntarily joined. How that person feels, because he's not supposed to be if a soldier spends time in being conversant with law, studying how to defend himself, uh, you know, figuring out while to going to a battlefield, if I get a disability, I'll have to spend money to fight for my own disability pension. What is the security? We talk about nationalism in this nation at the drop of the hat. Are we being nationalistic by denying the soldiers their rights? Today, out of 17 benches of the honorable tribunals, hardly 3 or 4 are functional for years. There's a PIL already in Honorable Apex Court. It is the Honorable Apex Court which had to sit on government, which some appointments were made. So there is a clarion call required that the soldiers need a justice system, because they are as much of the citizens of the country as anybody else, and more so because they are taking this extreme step to guard our freedom with everything that they have.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. So moving to this next question. So what are the points of distinguish between a civil justice system and military justice system?
See, in military justice system, because of the nature of job, discipline is paramount. So even when we as lawyers having the background of military law, what we also come across in various divisional benches of honorable high courts, honorable AFTs and Supreme Courts also, there cannot be two way about it. The soldier has to be disciplined. So that being said, yes, if there is a genuine grievance, courts are always very rational in their viewpoint, as long as that grievance is within the four corners of the legal system. They definitely stand with the appellate side. And of course, as a lawyer, we have to do our due deliberation and homework very well. But I think the basic difference is a soldier cannot expect to run away for 30 days and be treated, just come back and put him on duty, okay, just too bad. He has to be tried for desertion, because discipline is all military is all about. If that goes, nothing else remains. So there, I think the biggest distinction between the civil law and the criminal law.
Thank you, sir. So the next question. So why does the Armed Force Tribunal not have a power to intervene in the matters relating to summary trials, leave, transfer or posting? So would not you think giving such power is to be beneficial in judicial system?
Armed Forces Tribunal, as the judgments that I have quoted, one is Major General. I'll just quote you two judgments for everybody's concern. They should go through it to, take a right view of what is the role of Armed Forces Tribunals, because this has been by the Honorable Apex Court, no less. This defines, because see, as I told you in the initial phase only, Armed Forces Tribunal is evolving, and its interpretations are, slowly and slowly coming across. One is Civil Appeal number 7400 of 2013, Honorable Apex Court, Major General Shrikant Sharma and another. The other one is Civil Appeal number 131 by 2020, Balkrishna Ram versus Union of India. In both these judgments, it has been very clearly said the Armed Forces Tribunal has been given all the powers. In fact, the second judgment of Honorable Justice Gupta has gone to that level, because there has been a common interpretation when it is a matter which is a statutory interpretation, Armed Forces Tribunal cannot adjudicate on it. Here it has also been clarified, other than the contents which are under which the Armed Forces itself has been made. That is Armed Forces Act, AFT Act 2007, AFT Procedure Rules and Practice Rule 2008-2009. Other than these three statutes under which the AFT itself has been made, for everything else, Armed Forces Tribunal has the jurisdiction to interpret, including the ultra-virousness of a particular statute. So absolute power has been given by Armed Forces Tribunal. Yes, what you are talking about the AFT Act provisions, which makes certain distinction about these particular issues. But then those issues are available, remedies available at Honorable High Court. Like transfer, we approach Honorable High Courts in such matters. So it is not taking away the rights, it's rather giving those rights to the Honorable High Court to adjudicate those matters. So all the matters that you have listed is section 3O, exclusive section, but shall not include matters relating to a talk. But these are the matters that comes under the jurisdiction of Honorable High Court. So either High Court or AFT, everything is covered in that.
Thank you, sir. So moving on to the last question. So what are the teachings from your time in defense that you want to share with our students, which they should implement in their journey of becoming a good lawyer and most importantly a better person?
I would say how we talk about military, I don't think it is very different in legal fraternity also. These are not professions, these are calling. Like in military, you say it's not a job. Similarly, I think it is very important to understand what is the responsibility of becoming a lawyer. First thing, you have to be a model citizen. If you are not, you do not qualify to counsel or guide others out to what is right. And who is a lawyer? A lawyer is a counselor, a friend, a guide, a enabler, a catalyst for change. Our nation has been created by great lawyers, whether Pandit Ji, whether you talk about Patel, whether you talk about Ambedkar, they all were legal doyens of their time. Mahatma Gandhi, they created this nation. Do we think as a lawyer fraternity today we stand there? Look at the COVID fiasco. 12 lakh of us are without actually much of. How many of us are coming together to say, let's do something for our legal fraternity? Let's see that legal fraternity is getting a livelihood. Yes, bar councils are doing their bit. I am not denying that their effort. But as a community, are we coming together to stand up for each other? How will we forget? What stories will we tell our grandchildren when this pandemic is past and we moved on with our practice? I know of lawyers from my own fraternity and all who had to leave the city of Mumbai and to go back wherever they have come from, just they could not sustain. We hear so many big lawyers, talking about nationalism and all. What are we doing for? What if you cannot be your own? Like I am a Fauji and I am a lawyer. When it comes to a Fauj, I am part of a ex-serviceman body, putting my soul and time and energy to doing something for them. I have come across similar kind of suggestions to my lawyer friends, and I don't want to quote names or sound holier than thou, but there has been no, reaction which is positive. So first, let us start identifying ourselves as a community of one lawyers of this country, whether serving or retired. Secondly, let us come out of this political affiliation that this entire community is fettered by. It takes away your professionalism. It's not only become a particular share in governance and judiciary or particular thing. What are we as a professional? Do we ourselves look at ourselves as advocacy as a profession? Do we take pride in that advocacy as a profession, or is it about something to means to an end for a livelihood? I think that is where the challenge lies to this generation. Lastly, I am not a very technical person myself, technology person, but I see the change that is happening. I think the new law will be 40% digital. A physical interference of a lawyer, if we don't wake up to this reality, we'll suddenly see people who are not lawyers are in this space of digital services. Because on the button of a thing, these are already happening in, you must be LPO, you must have legal process outsourcing and all. So many of them are not qualified lawyers in foreign countries, in westernized countries. They are giving legal services on digital thing. So we have to quickly adapt ourselves in the digital format, empower ourselves. I, as an organization of ex-servicemen, I am offering you a free video conferencing digital platform. I have been, canvassing on LinkedIn, and you all are the right kind of group to use it. Please use the technology. Help others lawyers to reach out to their clients. Not a penny asked, not a penny given. We are a non-profit organization on that thing. So let us pull each other up. I think that is what will be the right ethos. See, when we say military, what do we say? A person has to stand by what he means. So it's the same thing about a lawyer. Anybody in any distress looks at a lawyer to have a solution. Now, are you that solution? We need to, because it's an ongoing process. Law is not a stop. We don't finish it while studying, we are learning with each and every case, each and every judgment, each and every appearance is an ongoing process. I think that pride should be there. That professional pride, you all need to really rejuvenate into it. Do not make it a pure profession of earning money. I think that is where the challenge lies. And as law is evolving, its vastness is just growing and growing. So today the opportunities are huge. Even with the digital restriction of the courts, there's so many formats of digital services of legal are going. Today we are talking to a group like you see here. You all are. You all are, as it is an inspiration. If you ask me, in today's generation of law, you are creating that benchmark. Keep progressing. More power to you all, and we are always there in any whichever way.
Thank you so much, sir, for the supportive words. So, thanks for enlightening us on the topic and helping the viewers scrutinize and understand the topic precisely. It was an absolute honor to have you with us, sir. Now, I would ask Abhiruchi to put forth the formal vote of thanks. Over to you, Abhiruchi.
On behalf of the Legal Law Forum, would like to express my sincere gratitude to Advocate Anshuman Oza sir for giving us his precious time, answering our questions very patiently, and giving us an informative coverage on the military justice system and the need and scope of lawyers in India. I would also like to thank the Legal team for joining us in this session. Lastly, sir, it was an absolute pleasure to have you with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and thanks to you all again for having me here. And let's continue this association after this interaction too. As a serviceman body, I will be more than happy to associate with your legal team. Thank you so much. Jai Hind.